You're watching Extras from the Extension on Eagle Community Television.
Hello, I'm Stacy Campbell with K-State Research and Extension of Ellis County. Well, this is a topic I've talked about before, but it is a relevant and timely topic, and that's taking soil samples. If you're going to be planting a row crop this summer, such as corn, grain sorghum, soybeans, now in this early spring is a good time to be taking soil samples if you haven't done so. And I think particularly this year is a good year to be taking samples if you normally don't, because we had really good yields last year in our crops, and with good yields you may have taken off more nutrients. So by taking soil samples, you would know how much fertilizer you're going to need for the next crop this year. Another, I think, important time to be taking soil samples is actually just the opposite, when we've had a dry year, a droughty year, which we didn't have. But in those years when we've had drought and dry years and we didn't take too many bushels off of the field, taking samples the following crop is important, because you may find out that you don't need near as much fertilizer for the following crop. But this year, following the great yields that we had last year, I think it's a good idea to be taking some soil samples this year to see just how much nutrients you need, how much fertilizer you need. And with our low commodity prices and just really having to watch our inputs, this will help fine-tune just how much fertilizer you really need by taking soil samples this spring for your row crops. Well, I'm sure a lot of producers know how to do it, but just kind of a quick recap. This is a soil sample probe. We have this in our Ellis County Extension office. Producers are welcome to come and check it out. This one's able to go down pretty deep to take your profile samples, but also you can take your shallower samples. And in talking about that, it's recommended to take two different types of samples. One is 0 to 6 inches, and the other one is your profile nitrogen when you go down from 0 to preferably 24 inches. Okay, so let's talk first about taking the shallow 0 to 6 inch samples. Those are the easier ones to take. They don't take much effort. They don't take very long. One of the things that I would recommend that you do if you're using a soil probe, and you don't have to use a soil probe, you could use a spade shovel, but you squirt some WD-40 into this tube, and it'll help get the cores out a lot easier, and you don't have to do it every time. Probably about every 10 or 12 cores that you take out, you'll want to shoot some more WD-40 in there. You'll know when it's time to do it, or when it starts getting harder to get these cores out, it's time to squirt some more WD-40 in here. And some people think, well, isn't that going to skew my soil sample results? There's been some work done by several universities, and this WD-40 will not affect the results of your soil analysis. Okay, so when we take our 0 to 6 inch samples, we're testing for phosphorus and potassium, and also we can test for zinc. And then also you'll get a reading on what your organic matter is and your soil pH. Those are all good things to know. Ideally, we recommend that you take at least 10, if not 15 samples per field. We recommend that you take a clean plastic bucket, and you're going to take those cores and put them in the bucket as you're walking around the field or driving around the field on your ATV or whatever. And once you're done with those 10 or 15 cores in that field, you're going to mix the cores together good. Probably going to need to break some of them up, and then you'll fill a bag, and we've provided these bags in the extension offices that you can send in to the K-State Soils Lab, but there's other good labs as well that you can send your soil samples into. The main point is to just take these soil samples and get them sent in. Okay, and then of course you're going to fill out your form and indicate what the depth of the sample that you took, what field it was in, and what test you want. After you've done your 0 to 6 inch samples, then you're going to move on, and ideally it's recommended to take your deeper samples to see how much nitrogen you need. Nitrogen is actually our #1 ingredient that we need in row crop production, with phosphorus being #2. And ideally, like I say, you want to go to 24 inches, but I realize some years when it's really dry, that's almost impossible to do. So whatever depth you can get to, you would indicate that on the soil sample form that you went from 0 to 15 or 18 inches, because that tells the lab you didn't go all the way to 24 inches, and they'll kind of factor in a default factor of how much nitrogen they think is in the rest of that profile. So when you take the deeper samples from 0 to 24 inches, you're testing primarily for nitrogen, but you can also test for sulfur. Sulfur is a nutrient that moves down into the soil with the water like nitrogen does. And once again, you're going to take the clean plastic bucket and ideally take at least 10, if not 15 cores per field, mix them together and put them into a separate bag. Now, another thing about taking soil samples is if the field is very big, say 80 acres, 100 acres, whatever, it's probably recommended ideally to split that field in half and, and sample, say, the 40 acres that's on the south end of the field versus the 40 acres you could split on the north end of the field. Another thing that we recommend is to not go and sample into areas that are not representative of the field. Like if there was an old oil field lease road in there, you wouldn't want to sample along there. It's not going to be a real good representation of what the rest of the field looks like. So just kind of stay in the areas that are more representative of the field. Also, if the field happens to have some different topography, maybe it's got quite a slope to it and there's even a top portion, a hill to that field, you may want to sample that separately from the side slope or the bottom ground. So some fields, you may even want to take 2 or 3 different samples depending on the topography of the field, but you're trying to kind of to break those up into quadrants that represent that portion of the field, if that makes sense. One of the things too I do need to mention is ideally if you start doing soil sampling, or if you have been, it's recommended to try to do it the same time of year each year. In other words, if you sample in the spring for your row crops in the early spring, it's best to try to come back and do that again every spring, or you could be sampling in the fall as well after harvest. But it's just good to try to get on a schedule where you're going back about the same time of the same month every year, depending on what crop it is that you're taking your soil samples. Well, this has been Stacy Campbell with K-State Research and Extension of Ellis County with Eagle Community Television.
You're watching extras from the Extension on Eagle Community Television.